Hi, my name is Camille Ryder, and I am a senior in James River High School's Specialty Center for Leadership and International Relations. This is my senior capstone project, so I thought I'd take a minute or two just to tell you all what I'm trying to do here. So ever since I was a little kid, I was surrounded by music all the time. We listened to everything from ZZ Top to Mozart in the car. So it always breaks my heart when people tell me that they want to learn more about music, but they just think it's too hard, or there's always 1,000 excuses not to learn about music for some reason. So the purpose of these lecture style interviews is to make music more accessible to everyone and anyone who is willing to learn more about music. I have tried to design this so that if you've been playing an instrument for 10 years, you're going to learn something. And if you've never learned how to read music, you're going to learn something. So I really hope that you engage with this material, and the music community, which is opening up and becoming even more vibrant, brings you as much joy as it brings to me. I hope you enjoy FineTuned. Mr. Myssyk, first, could you introduce yourself and tell me a little bit about your career and experience?
Of course, I can do that. My name is Daniel Myssyk, and I'm an orchestra conductor. I teach at VCU. I'm responsible of the orchestra program there. I also teach chamber music and conducting. So I do all sorts of stuff related to mostly conducting, including guest conducting professional orchestras in Canada, in the US, and in Mexico. I also am the assistant conductor of the Richmond Symphony Orchestra, and with that comes the responsibility of leading the Richmond Symphony Youth Orchestra, which is the top youth orchestra from our YOP, that's the Youth Orchestra Program.
So, how did you get started in music?
I got started in music at the age of 14. So I'm one of those people who had very little interest in classical music when they were a kid, and I was really mostly into like heavy rock and roll music when I was 10 to maybe 13 years old, and I was imagining myself becoming more of a bass guitar player, or electric guitar guy. I don't know. I was just not there yet, I suppose. And what really changed my approach to music is that I was introduced to the guitar, classical guitar, in a group course that was offered at my high school back then, and I really fell in love with the teacher. He had so many wise things to do about to say about music in general, and a few things to teach us technically that would bring me up to a certain level. But because it was a group lesson, I felt like extremely limited quickly because things were not moving fast enough. And eventually, I just asked him plainly, do you offer private lessons? And he said, yes, of course, I could teach you privately if you'd like. And the miracle was that he was just like almost a neighbor of mine back in those days. So we were just living like maybe 10 minutes away from each other by walk. And so that's how it all started. I mean, it was just remarkable how generous this person was. He became immediately a great mentor to me. He was still a student of guitar and composition at McGill University, which is a very fine institution in Montreal, and a well-known university in North America, anyways. And so, by generous, I mean not only was teaching me the guitar, but also keeping me after the lesson for at least an extra hour for us to listen to more music, and not only classical, but of all different genres and styles. That would include jazz music to early Renaissance music on the lute, you name it. So it's just like it was absolutely fascinating. I was so much looking forward to it as a teenager. Every week was like a sacred rendezvous where I would get to learn so much from him. And then eventually this really inspired me and motivated me to better myself as a musician and eventually go to music school. And that's what I did, and ended up at Montreal's Conservatory, where I received all my education on the double bass. So yes, there was a transition at one point to an orchestral instrument because someone asked me whether I could play the bass in their ensemble. I said, well, yes, of course I would like to, but I don't have a bass and I don't know how to play, so will you teach me? And so they did, and then I ended up with a small city orchestra. And after 6 months of playing the bass, I was already in the orchestra, trying to find my way and my bearings. And from then on, there was this massive interest in orchestral literature. So not only that I've become, I think, very proficient on the instrument, but also I wanted to know more about the music, the theory, the composition, the orchestration, and then eventually all leading to a decision that was absolutely critical in my life, and that took place at a rather late stage in my career. I was 30 years old when I decided to enter the field of conducting and become a really serious student of the art of conducting. So from 30 till, I guess, 36, I studied almost, well, not non-stop, definitely not, because the first 2 years I only studied in summer institutes. But I've become a very, very, very dedicated student in conducting in my 30s, and I launched my own professional orchestra. It was a chamber orchestra that I ran for a good 16 years, and so that gave me a lot of experience. I got a chance to try a lot of things and learn my craft as a conductor. So all in all, eventually doing a second master degree in conducting that time at Rice University in Houston, Texas, led me to, I would say really some serious stuff, meaning big full-time appointment here at VCU. And so this is how my professional career started in the US in 2007, right after I completed my second master in conducting.
So just to ease into the topic a little bit, I wanted to ask, what is a live music experience that you've had that you'll never forget?
Oh gosh, there would be more than one, because it depends on if you want to know about the live experience that I lived as an audience member or as a conductor or as an instrumentalist. There are so many different good ones that I can think of. As an instrumentalist, I mean, it was when I was principal bass for a really fine orchestra back in the days in Quebec. Right after I was finished with my studies at the conservatory, and it was a big 3-week project with an ad hoc orchestra that was led by an old German conductor whose name was Franz Paul Decker. And Decker was really, really known for his work with German composers in particular. So super solid interpreter of Beethoven, Brahms, and Mahler and Bruckner, you see. And so I saw him conduct many times the Montreal Symphony, and every time as an audience member I was riveted to my seat. And then I got to play for him with this orchestra, this ad hoc orchestra I was talking about, in the capacity of principal bass, playing Mahler's First Symphony, which has a big bass solo at the beginning of the third movement, yeah, on the brother theme thing in minor though. So and I got to play for him in that capacity. It was absolutely gratifying because I think he really liked me. So that's it. That's good. That's better than not being liked. I gotta say that one of my most memorable moments as a conductor was with my former professional orchestra, Appassionata. Actually, there are two. It was one night where we were on tour in Ontario, where I decided for the first time of my life to perform all the program from memory. So I got myself, this big challenge. So I was on the bus. You know how it works in Canada. So it's a very vast country, and you don't necessarily fly from one place to another. We actually rented buses, and so we rode great distances to from one point to the next, from Quebec to Ontario, and visiting different cities. And then we ended up at Sault Ste. Marie, in the western part of Ontario, and there we go. We were there that night, ready to perform. But before that, my general manager said, "You should consider conduct from memory. I think you're there. You know the piece. Evidently, you're never looking at the score. Blah blah blah." So, but it's like, I don't know. It's like free climbing. You see what I mean? But I think I was up for a challenge, and so I decided, okay, I just need to go back to my score and revisit it and try to sing absolutely everything, not look at the score, just maybe for confirmation here and there. That's it. And so I was in my hotel room when I was finished with the process of memorizing. And I had the best possible time that night with the orchestra. And for the students, it's for the students, what I must say. For the musicians, they said it was just a fabulous experience, for everybody to be part of that. I felt like profoundly inspired and completely, almost in trance. I was in a place in my mind. You know the term being in the zone?
Yeah.
So I think this is it. For me, that's the most important thing as a conductor, right? When I can reach that state of mind, that's called being in the zone, completely immersed in the moment, into the music making. That's absolutely nothing else that matters on the planet but what you're doing at the moment you're doing it. And so that happened many times for me, but in a very special way that night, because that was the first time I was ever going to conduct from memory. And the second time the second fondest memory I have is my final concert with the same group, Appassionata, where I got to conduct Mahler's Adagietto from the Fifth Symphony. Do you know that piece? The Adagietto? Yeah. That's for strings and harp.
Yeah.
And it's such a riveting and beautifully dramatic piece. And so also it's a love song for Alma, right? Alma Mahler, Mahler's wife. And for me, I put that on the program as part of the program, and to just precisely convey this idea of love toward the orchestra. Like, that was my gift from me to them, like the piece was the gift by Gustav from Gustav to Alma, So so I put a lot of a lot of emotion in the making of this project, and it was the culminating point for me. So that obviously it was an extremely emotional night. So I will never forget that. Yeah.
Those are always awesome experiences.
Oh yeah.
So how, I think something that people don't necessarily understand is how to appreciate and receive that emotion from classical pieces. I think that's kind of an issue that the classical music world is facing, is the discrepancy between understanding and the music. So how would you recommend someone who doesn't have classical music training, how do you tell them how to listen to the music to understand it and not miss anything, or not?
Yes, some people just have the art of explaining music in a way that really communicates well with people, and I find great interest in trying to do just that. Personally, I do that every Tuesday with Rousseau, for example, and trying to get their attention on the detail about the music. And so I am completely for breaking the barriers between the general public and the classical music. I think it's we're living in a time and space where everything is so accessible. So I'm not certainly one who's going to say, well, or give credit to those who say that's an elitist art, for example, that classical music is. I don't think it is at all. I think it's for everybody. And at one point, maybe in history, it was more geared toward the elites. But certainly, if you look back at the time of Schubert, for example, he was starting playing not in a court setting, but in salons, right, for bourgeois people. So, I mean, it's been a while since music started as being something more democratic, and so it's just a matter of creating interest in people. So no barrier, no wall between the classical music and people. And how you do that? You do that by finding the words that best communicate the emotions that are in score. And so there's or I like the term affects, for example, AFFECT. As affects is good term. So because people can really relate to emotions, right? So if you speak to their emotions, or their emotional selves, you are at risk, so to speak, to making your point, right? So try to find the words that are going to enable an emotional response with your audience. And for example, there's so many pieces I can think of, but you referred to Shostakovich 5 earlier in the conversation before we started the recording. And there's a place for us, as we speak about the music, to talk about how it feels to be lonely, maybe how it feels to how triumph can be expressed in music. These ideas, right? So and then you explore the journey between the loneliness and the triumphal ending. And so there are all sorts of ways that you can present the music in an interesting fashion, even to those who are not necessarily experienced with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. So you mentioned that you weren't interested in classical music when you were younger. So maybe you already sort of answered this, but what kind of, was there like a moment when you were, I think it's common for younger people to listen to classical and be like, oh, that's just kind of boring. But it's not. There's so much in it. So was there a moment when it just kind of clicked with you of how
Yes.
much
Yeah, absolutely. I can see myself in my room. I was a teenager and I had this little TV, black and white TV, 12-inch screen that I got for, the previous Christmas or something like that. And I turned this on. There was a really nice program on Radio Canada, which is a Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. And every Sunday night they would present either a concert or maybe a play, something of cultural value. And that night they presented a piece on a group of young violinists. They were tiny little boys and girls who were just playing in a massive ensemble, like they were filling up the stage. And they were by the hundreds, all tiny little creatures playing the violin. I think they were playing some kind of Pachelbel canon or piece by Vivaldi. But the style of the music, I mean, of course, if I were to listen again to the same interpreters, I would probably go, oh my God, they barely know how to play the violin. But then I was so uneducated, I knew nothing. I just went for the feeling, for the beauty of watching these young people playing together, and also I went for the music. I really developed a sense for the Baroque style. I didn't even know that was called Baroque at that point, of course. But that's how that was the key moment for me. It was like a mini the turning point, I would say, where I got to say to myself, well, oh, I never realized that violin could sound that great, and putting that many violins together could be such a feat for the ear. So that's how it all really started. Funny enough, right? Just like you see, you're you're watching TV, and it's just like it's a moment of truth where you realize that there's much more to this than I have ever thought there could be. And you're right; it's much more complicated. Like to listen to classical music is much more demanding for the listener, right? Than to listen to any kind of more popular music. I also like popular music. I don't have anything against it, but I'm just saying that it's a complete different experience, and it requires a lot more of attention if you're interested in really understanding classical music.
So, just a follow-up question.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think you get out of all of that extra attention and that extra energy you have to put into the music?
Well, it's like you when you are in an interesting conversation with someone, right? What keeps you interested in keep going? You know, why do you want a conversation sometimes to never end? It's because it's because that someone is telling you things that resonate in you, that speak to you in a unique way, that trigger an emotional response, that trigger your sense of your own intelligence, and that maybe provoke your ways of looking at things, that open to a new way of interpreting things. So if that's the case, if you're that in that kind of conversation or relationship with someone, that's very stimulating, right?
Right.
So I see myself listening to music in relatively the same predicament. That is, I'm being exposed to someone who really has something interesting to tell me, and I want to listen to every detail and grasp all the nuances as best as I can, at least, right? Because there's so much work put into a score, so much heart, so much intelligence, and so much artistry that every time I stop, seriously, I just like make room for that experience in my life. I feel like I'm bettering myself. I become, every time I listen to music, I listen better, right? I listen with more expectations. So I listen. I've become a more critical listener, and great composers have that in them. That it doesn't matter if you've become more critical, you're still going to uh, keep enjoying them, and maybe even better because you've become more critical.
Yeah. So, another follow-up. I'm just curious if you hear a piece from a composer you've never heard of, and a piece not in usual repertoire, and you've just completely fresh to this music. What are you first looking for?
I've developed a keen sense of color, especially if we're talking about a new piece for orchestra. I'm very attracted to the way the composer uh, has written specifically for that group or ensemble. I'm I'm when I was younger, like say in my late teens, early 20s, I was still a little conservative, and I was kind of very drawn into the good old masters, but I was forcing myself to go to contemporary music concerts. I was not enjoying that particularly, but I was literally pushing my butt into the concert hall so that I can really at least try to get an understanding of what those composers were trying to do. So this is very challenging for me, very demanding, and not all that pleasant. And but I think that because I force myself to do that, I've become more and more attracted to some composers. And when I don't know, to play as an instrumentalist has helped me, you know, getting new music in my blood flow. I don't know how to put it, and so it became a more, and it has become a more and more organic affair between me and new music. So much so that now there's very little difference when I'm listening to new music. My reaction is not uh, as as primitive as it used to be. It's more complex, and that's because I know more what to listen to. I told you about the orchestral colors and the details in the orchestration, but also you're trying to listen to things in a different way. So for example, what's so reassuring in classical music in general is the sense of form and proportion that you have when you listen to a sonata form, right? Or a rondo. That's all very reassuring. These are really um, forms that we've been used to listen to, and but it's not necessarily operating in the same way with new music. So you you have to let yourself be drawn into the music, and not and try to be as non-judgmental as possible, at least for the first time you listen to it, because you have to just be as open-minded you can, right? You know, leave the composer a chance, um, even if you're not super comfortable with the media and the way the composer uses the media. And so that's how I approach a new piece of music, right? With frankly, with a open mind and open ears, and with very little expectations, frankly.
Yeah. So for my last question,
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, this isn't necessarily on track, but just having worked with you before, wanted to ask you, what do you feel like when you're conducting on the podium? What do you feel like you're giving to the audience? Like, what is your purpose?
Okay. Well, to the audience is different than to the orchestra, right?
Right.
And that's an interesting question because you're caught in the middle when you're conducting.
Yeah.
You know that. So, and there's a part of me that wants to tell you, in a sense, the orchestra is also a kind of an audience, you know. Not that you're trying to put a show in front of the orchestra, but if you're not quote unquote entertaining enough, if you don't come up with a visual strategy that's going to keep their interest high, well, they're going to stop looking up because they well know they can play the score without you to a certain extent. So it's interesting, right? How you want to refine your conducting technique and your knowledge of styles in an effort to be as interesting one can be in front of an orchestra. And but it also has to be really genuine, and it has to come from the inside. It needs not to be a show I think. And as I'm working my way through a score in front of the orchestra, I like to show as best I can elements from the scores that I judge are the most important. And so by displaying with my hands those deemed important elements, I'm also, in relationship with the audience that's in my back, right? And I tell them what to listen to. If my conducting is organized really well around the music, around this plane or that plane, that should also be an indication for the audience on what to listen for, right? So that becomes a really more fulfilling experience for them as well, because they don't necessarily understand exactly all the gestures, but they see that the gestures have an impact on what they're hearing. And also, my favorite conductors when I was your age, Camille, were those who were making clear that they had a fine understanding of the overall form of a piece. They could, it's like they were able to draw an arc, over, over the symphony and make sense of the whole from the beginning to the end. And in my own humble way, that's why I'm trying to recreate. I'm trying to create the circumstances where my audience will get a sense of the form, will get a sense of proportion, will feel the arc of the piece from the beginning to the end. So that's why there's nothing more important to understand that the gestures matter, and that they need not to be superfluous. They need to be tactically engaged in the process of showing important musical elements, not only to your players, but as a direct effect of that to the audience as well.
Yeah. Well, that was an amazing answer. Thank you so much for taking the time to meet with me. I really enjoyed
Thank
learning
you.
more about you and how you regard music. Thank you so much for watching this video. It means the world to me that more people want to become involved in the music community and learn more about music. There is so much more to come, and I'm so excited to share with you all. So please follow this capstone on Instagram and check out my website. You can find more updates to come there. Also interact with the material, start a conversation in the comments, or send me a question directly in the link I provided in the description. I hope you learned something. Stay tuned.